Welcome to the My Personal Football Coach Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, episode 22 with Tony Carr.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson-Hurst.
Hi guys, welcome back to another show. This week we've got a living legend as a guest this week. I was privileged to spend an hour or so in the company of Tony Carr, who's the ex-academy manager of West Ham United's famous academy. Players that came through his academy while he was there include people like Frank Lampard, Rio Ferdinand, Joe Cole, Michael Carrick, Jermiane Defoe, Tony Carr, to name just a few. So real had such a massive impact on the footballing landscape for West Ham, but also obviously for England as well, helping bring through such a massive quality of generation of players. So was really privileged that he agreed to come on the show, and he had so much knowledge and wisdom to share. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. It's one of the obviously one of the pinnacles for me, interviewing someone like Tony. So really real pleasure to spend some time with him. So I know you're going to enjoy it. Things rolling over at My Personal Football Coach. The app's feedback from the app is going from strength to strength. Really appreciate all the feedback we're getting from users all around the world. Remember, the Dynamic Ball Mastery Program, the world's leading online individual technical homework program, being used by players all over the world, pro clubs, amateur clubs, individuals. So if you're interested in doing a bit extra, if you're a player or a parent, you want your child to improve not only technically but also improve their physicality as well and their dynamic movement, just go to My Personal Football Coach and get the Dynamic Ball Mastery Program and download the app from the Apple and Google store. So really pleased and privileged. Everybody's been giving such great feedback, real honoured. So I'm really looking forward to the next few months. Got lots of things coming up, including a trip to Thailand and then to Canada. So busy, but without further ado, let's get into the show. So, Tony Carr, welcome to the show. Can you just give us a little bit of background about your experience within the game? Just a brief run through briefly.
Obviously, played football at school for East London boys. I was an East London lad and signed for West Ham United in 1966 as an apprentice professional. Signed as a pro a couple of years later. Never quite made the grade, but sort of took an interest in coaching while I was playing and was working in schools and got my initial qualification while I was at West Ham, the preliminary award, the FA preliminary award. And then I took that into, when I left West Ham United and went part-time playing for Barnet, I then got a job coaching in schools in North London, where my coaching was honed and made me get well organised and I got a bad injury and I got a phone call just completely out of the blue from John Lyall in 1973 to become a part-time coach at West Ham with their juniors, and I accepted that role. I sort of basically had to give up the playing career to do it, but it set me in good stead because I was there for 43 years up until 2016, and so a long, illustrious career at West Ham United and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Tell us a little bit how did you progress through the ranks from that first provisional job to being academy manager?
My first role was just Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and then help run the teams on a weekend, bearing in mind that it wasn't as extensive then as it is now in academies. You weren't allowed to play schoolboy teams for professional clubs in them days. And then for 7 years I was doing that, and then in 1980 I got asked to come full-time by John, and just after West Ham had won the FA Cup, and I then was running the youth team. I was in charge of the under-18s, taking over from Ron Boyce, and as the youth programs in all clubs developed first and foremost through centres of excellence, where you could extend coaching hours and have younger age groups. And because I'd been there the longest in effect and had the most experience, I was asked to become the Centre of Excellence Director, which then led into Howard Wilkinson's Charter for Quality, and then that led into the EPP with academies, and I progressed becoming the Centre of Excellence Manager, the Academy Manager, and then obviously the Academy Director through the EPP programme.
Tell us a little bit about that journey. Obviously now modern day game, academy game, everyone talks about it. Players are coming in at 7 and 8 years old.
Yeah.
Got under 9 teams. What was the progression like in terms of being, obviously one of the bigger clubs, having an academy? What ages did you start, and when did that, how did that filter down?
I think when I first started years ago, we only took boys on from 14 onwards, 13, 14, under the old system of associate schoolboy forms, where you can only sign a boy at 14 years of age. And then that boy is then committed. Up until that point, the best players were travelling around all different clubs, trialling, training, and sort of seeing which club they favoured. And then that progressed that you could do the Centres of Excellence. You could start to run teams from much younger. Then that progressed to the academies, where you could take them at under 8, under 9 teams. And I think it was a little bit of shooting in the dark, to be honest, in terms of recruitment, in terms of what do you coach an 8-year-old? It's difficult. I certainly learned that the best way for me or for us was that not basically to overcoach. Don't tell them what to do. Let the games, let the practice be the teacher of the technical skills or tactical aspect you were trying to get across. Whether it be pushing up from the back, whether it be holding width, or whether it be hitting a target player early, or whatever it was, as basic as it might have been, is not to sort of stop it at every moment and correct and constantly correct. Let the players learn, let the players experiment what works for them, etc. But certainly my mantra was not to overcoach, and I was very conscious of that, especially these sort of very young ones, when you're the very talented boys that are showing a real aptitude are going into football clubs now at 6 and 7 years of age. And whether that translates, in 10 years' time, that they'll be, still the best players at 17, 18, is debatable, to be honest. And what do you coach an 8-year-old? Will you coach a 7-year-old? Or do you coach them? Do you sort of put them in an environment where they're playing with the best players that you can recruit? So in other words, the best players are playing with the best players, and I think questions will be asked of them if you just played small-sided games. The opposition, their opponent, if you like, even though they're with the same club, would be asking different questions of them, and I think it's for them to work that out. You may point them in a different direction. You may put a theme on a practice, whether it was tight, whether it was small, whether it was long, whether it was narrow, or an aspect of the game you're trying to promote. But certainly I think let that practice, let that game be the teacher rather than the coach constantly intervening. And I'm a big believer in that at a very young age. And I think there is a debate whether clubs should be taking them at that young age, and certainly signing them at that age, and then releasing them at 11. Now, what message does that send to a young kid, a young impressionable kid? You've been at a football club for a year, professional club for a year, and they release you. Does that say you're not good enough? Well, of course it doesn't, but you're sending really mixed messages to young kids about where they are in the game. And
so what do you think would be the ideal scenario for that? Take away academies' ability to sign players at under 9s, under 10s?
Yeah, I think you shouldn't be taking them. I would say of 12 years of age would be an ideal age group.
Yeah. About
12. The problem is, it's never going to happen, because if that was your policy at your club, by the time you got round to recruiting at 12, the best players would be gone, because other clubs were not going to follow that line. So it's a difficult.
Is that from a purely because a welfare thing? You're concerned about the problems with releasing players, or is it also about the coaching?
I think it's a bit of both. I think young players these days are overcoached.
Yeah.
I think there is a welfare issue.
Yeah.
And I think there's a psychological issue as well, in terms of turning these kids off the game. And in other words, they'll fall out of love with the game. And I'd be very concerned about that. What you can do about it, there's a big debate to be had about that. I'm perhaps not in a position to dictate that, but I'd certainly like to be in a discussion, if we were discussing those issues, just through my experiences working with young players. And certainly the biggest problem is with clubs is fear. You've got an under-9 team, so you start recruiting at under-8s, which is obvious because they're the next intake. But now you're recruiting at under-7s and you're recruiting at under-6s. It's this fear factor from clubs trying to, hog the best talent or corral the best talent into their academy. And it's they're frightened to miss the talent because their jobs depend on it. If you're not producing players, your board of your football club are going to ask questions. And there's another issue there is the finance that's being put into academies now. When I first started, I was the only full-time coach in the youth program. Now there's probably 20 full-time coaches in youth programs. And other support staff with sports science, medical, education, welfare, etc., etc. So the expenditure now is massive. So boards now are looking more and more at youth academies than they ever did. They let it get on with it years ago because they were investing, but they weren't investing massive amounts of money. And as long as you produced a player every other year, they were quite happy. But now the pressure's on. Questions are being asked about, we're spending X amount of million on this academy. Where's the players? Yeah. What's the point of having an academy? I'm spending 5 million on an academy. I might as well scrub the academy and spend 5 million on a ready-made player every summer for a first team. And I suppose if you were the chairman or owner of a football club, that's a question you might be asking your youth
What's
program.
your thoughts then about Brentford? They did the similar sort of thing, right?
I think it's sad that they felt they had to do that. I really do. But I can understand where they were coming from. They're in West London. They're on the doorstep of Chelsea, on the doorstep of QPR, on the doorstep of the other big club, Fulham. Yeah. That have got big academies. Fulham and Chelsea certainly Category 1. Yeah. Fulham Category QPR Category 2, I believe now. So they felt that maybe that they couldn't recruit the best players in that area. So what was the point? If we were getting the second-rate player, what's the point of us having an academy?
I suppose as well, then the argument is also, if they did have a good player, someone's just going to come in and
someone's going to
anyway.
pinch him.
Yeah.
If they did get one, someone would have come and pinch him, and the compensation is not adequate for their investment and their time. So I can understand where they're coming from, I must be honest. In a big club like Chelsea, they've got all the resources. It's not to knock Chelsea, that's what they have. Got a fantastic training ground, got a fantastically well-run academy with Neil Bath, and it's well-financed. So they can afford to scout everywhere, be everywhere, know where the best players are, and try to attract them to their club. So if you're on their doorstep, it's going to be very difficult for you.
I was going to come to this later, but what if you're? Let's come to this later while we're on the subject. What if you're not on their doorstep? So one of the things, obviously, I worked at Chelsea and Tottenham for many years, and you realise in that time that Chelsea, the big fish in London, they're taking players from not just Brentford but from every club, aren't they? So everyone's even like from Tottenham or there's some, So what was your thoughts about being within that environment, being a big club at West Ham, but also then a Chelsea coming in
bigger
and
than
taking
us,
players?
bigger than West Ham, of course. Certainly there's two arguments to be had there. I think first and foremost they're highlighting and targeting the best players in London within their catchment, hour and a half. So all players in London are going to be vulnerable to a club like Chelsea, a club like Arsenal, the big clubs that have got the finance, the wherefore, and the staff to be able to do that. So there's that. The argument then again is, if they do go to this club and they are quite successful, when they get to about 16, 17, Chelsea are now up, and I'm not knocking Chelsea, but Chelsea are going to then recruit the best players in Europe. So, and then sometimes the best players around the world. So it won't be good enough that you're a midfield player, being the best midfield player in England. You've then got to be the best midfield player in the world, arguably, or maybe at least Europe. One, to stay pace with what's coming in, and two, to get in the first team. So Chelsea now got this model where they've got 20, 30 players out on loan, and they loan these players to clubs in Europe and elsewhere to give these players, to get these players a value. So they become a valuable asset, so they then sell them for more than they recruited them for. So it becomes a business model rather than a development model. And that's the way the game's going, unfortunately. And I'm not knocking Chelsea in any way, shape or form. You know, I know the way it runs, I know Neil Bath very well, I get on with him very well. And I've got a lot of respect for them. But that's the way the game's going. And so it's up to a club, you know, like when I was at West Ham, for us to come in and put those arguments to the young players that we had and said, look, they're a better club in some respects. They've got a better training ground, they've got better facilities, etc., etc., etc. They'll probably give you more wages in terms of when they sign you as a professional. But your pathway here at West Ham is going to be a lot easier getting into the first team environment. So that was the argument we tried. It didn't always work, but that was the argument we tried to employ when we felt we were going to lose perhaps one of our better players. But that's the nature of the beast, I'm afraid.
So tracking back a little bit then, talking about when you first took over, tell us about the philosophy of the academy, the methodology. What did you imprint that, and where did that come from?
Yeah, well, that come from Ron Greenwood, really, initially. When he first came to the club, I wasn't there at that time, but he was first team coach at Arsenal when he came to West Ham as manager. Not very many people know that, but he was an academy, assistant manager at assistant coach, first team coach at Arsenal. West Ham recruited him in the early 60s to become their manager, and he completely changed the philosophy of the club. I would liken what Ron did to West Ham as what Wenger did at Arsenal when he first went there. Changed the whole philosophy. You know, whereas training in them days for the first team was, you know, running. Manager stood on the touchline in a suit and a pipe, probably, or a fag, and just watched the players run around the pitch. They had a five-a-side, did a few sprints, and that was it, every day. Where Ron came in and every day was training with a ball. So everybody in pairs, individually, had a ball. So every day players had a ball to improve technique and skill. He was very much an advocate of the way the game was played in Europe, and I think he was very influenced by the Hungarians when they came over many years before and give England a lesson in
Puskas and
and give England a lesson in technique and philosophy. And I think Ron tried to impose a very technical programme at West Ham United. So it was always pass and move. You know, keep it. His mantra was always keep it simple, play the way you're facing, make your first pass a forward pass. That all simple things. And his mantra, when I first come across him, was we're trying to develop good habits in young players. If we develop good habits in players, you know, all these things we're trying to improve them become second nature. So when I started to get involved, and when I was an apprentice there, training every day was with a ball. Very rarely running for the sake of running, other than pre-season training where it was all running around the forest up the hills for 2 weeks. But certainly everything was technically based.
So you talk about technically based. What does that session look like then with the ball?
Well, the session would be, you'd be in pairs and you'd be just passing the ball, or one player would set a ball back and run, and you'd have to chip it into his run, and then you'd just go and join him, and you'd set it back and you'd make a run and he'd chip it into your run. So all things like that. So there was technique and movement, and then he would encourage that into threes. So it was, you know, play into that player who sets it back to the third player, because in the area, in that triangle, and this player that played the first ball makes the run and he hits the run of the third man run. So, you know, he was very big on third man running, and I took that into my training with the young players. You know, when I spoke to Rio Ferdinand many years after I'd had him as a youth team player, he was playing for Manchester United. I bumped into him. First thing he said to me, he said, "Are you still doing third man running?" So I said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "It stayed with me." He said, "It stayed with me." He said, "You know, that up, back, and in."
Well, that's when the people from Ajax we spoke to on the very show, they said the same. That big part of their philosophy is the third man run as well. That's a key element of their philosophy.
Key element. I mean, and I always, because we would then, as the lads progressed it, it would have to be done. Everything had to be done one touch.
Yeah.
So the ball in had to be playable. So whenever I was coaching, whenever I saw a player give a player ball to another player, whether it was 10 yards or 50 yards, the object was that ball, when it arrived at its target, had to be playable. So if I smash it at you from 10 yards away, you're fighting to control it. It's unplayable.
Yeah.
So I've got to then give a ball that's playable. Now, whether I want to play it one touch or not is then my choice. But, I'm not making that choice for you, but I'm giving you that option. So it was up, one touch, playable, back, one touch, playable. The run hit the runner. So it drops into an area, either just in front of him, or if you're bending it round or playing it along the ground, it's running alongside him.
Yeah.
So it arrives slightly in front of him.
So what you're talking about is a very progressive type of football, right?
Yeah.
And what interests me now is thinking about the conventional way England have played in the past. The first team maybe in the Sir Charles Hughes method, which is a bit more direct.
Yeah.
What is that like, trying to get players to play in that, maybe when they're used to a more traditional direct game? And also talk about when you're getting coaches in and then you're implanting you've got the new coaches coming in as the academy grows.
Yeah.
How do you encourage them to coach and play this way when maybe, it's not the traditional way of playing in England?
Well, I can only speak for the way, I did things. One of the first things I would tell a player, ask a player, that whenever he receives the ball, I want to think that his first option's got to be a forward pass. So whether it's a back player, I'd say to the back player, can you hit the target? Can you hit the striker? Or one of the, as it is now, the front three. Can you hit if you can't, why can't you? Because the opposition have dropped off too deep. There's no space behind their midfield to drop it in. So now we've got to build it from the back. But I want the first pass forward. But if I can hit the front player and bypass midfield, that's what I want them to do. So it wasn't as if you've got to play 5 yards, got to play 10 yards. Can I hit the front player? If I can't, I've got to then have other choices and then build our way through.
So I suppose the conventional one might have been, there's a big man at the top, put it up there for
Yeah.
him to win the header.
Or Ron Greenwood used to coach us years and years ago, and we used to be in practices. We used to be 40 yards apart, and he'd say, "I want you to just chip it to your partner." But what he want you to do is imagine there's a hoop just about a yard in front of your partner. I want you to try and drop that ball into that imaginary hoop. So as I was I'm chipping it just into that imaginary hoop. So that player has to come and get it.
Yeah.
It comes off a yard.
Yeah.
And obviously tries to control it before it bounces, or get there as it bounces, or plays it as it bounces, whether he sets it or flicks it on or whatever. And Ron always used to say, if you're playing in midfield or you're playing up front with your back to goal, you've got to play on the half turn. And these are all the things that I was taught as a young player that took me into my coaching for many, many years. And when I first started at West Ham as a young part-time coach, I got interviewed by Ron Greenwood, and he said to me, just do the things you did, just do the things that you did when you were here as a player. That's all he said to me. You just do the things that you were taught when you were here as a player. So take all those things you've learned and impart them onto the next generation of young players. So it's all simple things like that, drop it into a hoop a yard in front. So you're not aiming at the play, aiming at the space just in front of him. So you're just dropping it into his feet. Again, that mantra, can you drop a ball into a player that's playable? Now you might have to have 2 touches, but at least one to touch, one to control, or one to pass, or turn, whatever the skill you're demanding. What we would never say to a young player, any young player ever, is you must do this. Never ever do that. I mean, in my opinion, never ever say you must do this. Now, first team managers might be saying that to their team, and say, like, when you get the ball to the back, just hit the front. Don't think about anything else. When you play in midfield, if it just comes to you in midfield, all I want you to do is hook it on. Don't want you to think about getting it down, trying to. So obviously he's now playing percentages, playing for points, playing for his livelihood every week. But if you're a developer of young players, hopefully you've got more time to do that, so you can be a bit more patient with the young players, but never, in my opinion, tell them what to do. Show them options. Remember, if we're coaching, and I might stop it, the ball goes into a player and he turns, looks forward, plays it and gives it away, and I'd say stop. I wouldn't say you should have done this, I'd say to him, what did you see?
Yeah.
What was you trying to do? And he'd say, I just tried to hit the striker, but he comes short and I played long, for instance. And I'd say, because I'd frozen, I'd say, now have a look to your left. And he'd go, did you see Jimmy out there, free as a bird on the left-hand side, no one round him? If you'd just got your head up and, and got a picture earlier, you might have transferred it on a diagonal and we would be attacking down that left-hand side. And he'd go, oh, yeah. So it was then about, before the ball arrives, try and get a picture. Try and get a picture in your mind of play. Trying to get a picture of what's on, where your players are. Get on the half turn, be doing this all the time, swivelling and looking, getting pictures in your head. So when the ball comes to you, you've got a good idea of where your players are. But I'll then say to that player, if you didn't see Jimmy out on that left-hand side, you can't play the pass. So I wouldn't moan at him. I'd just say, if you didn't see him, you couldn't play it to him. If he'd have said to me, yeah, I saw him, but I thought that, I'd go, well, that might have been the better choice. So in other words, he's seen him, but chose that one. And in that occasion, the wrong choice. And I'd say to him, maybe that might have been the better choice. That's all I would say. And then let them work out for themselves the next time a ball came to them, or the next time they were in that sort of situation.
So talk a bit about when the academy starts to grow and you need to recruit coaches.
Yeah.
How do you go about that process of recruiting? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
And then what's the coach development look like?
Yeah. I found that whereas for years and years and years I'd done it with a very, very small team of staff. And when the academy started to grow, especially with EPPP, where coaches, we more or less had to double the coaches because we now got 2 coaches with every team. I found that difficult to find the right coaches, I have to say. So first and foremost, it was minimum qualification, UEFA B, level 3. Same for goalkeeper coaches. And then I'd ask them to come in and do a 30-minute session. I wouldn't tell them what to do. I'd say, well, you put on your favourite session or the session you feel most comfortable with, age appropriate. If it's under 10s, don't have them shooting for 30 yards. Age appropriate session. And then I'd watch them. And I'd be more interested in their personality than in every little coaching point they were bringing out. I had to satisfy myself they understood what they were doing, but I was more interested in the personality of the individual than anything else, the character, because especially with the very young ones, they're going to hang on your every word, and you've got to put on coaching sessions, maybe 2 or 3 times a week for these young kids. You've got to make it interesting, you've got to make it fun, you've got to make it enjoyable, and your personality is going to be key to all that. I want them players, after every session, to want to come back for the next one. So if you're too overbearing, or you're too bombastic, or you're too demanding, or you're too critical, the players are going to go, Dad, I don't like it over there anymore. I'm not enjoying it anymore, because that's what you can get. So that then gives them an excuse, if they're one of your better players, to seek elsewhere. And I think if you create the right environment, players don't want to leave. They get ingrained in what you're trying to do. They get ingrained in the way you do it. They get ingrained in the fun of it, the enjoyment of it, and at the same time learning. Because I think a mixture of all those things has to go into your sessions. A mixture of all those things. It's still got to be fun. Even though it's a professional environment, it still has to be fun. And there's nothing wrong with sometimes having a little bit of laughter on the training pitch. Although some I see are so serious and are so. There's still got to be an element of that, of course. It is a serious environment trying to develop players to play in the Premier League. of course. But the journey isn't, there's got to be highs and lows. There's got to be ups and downs, and there's got to be fun as well involved in all that. So it's still, if you're a 10-year-old, you've got a 10-year-old son or 8-year-old son, and you go, what was it like today, son? Did you enjoy it? He goes, no, I didn't enjoy it. The coach kept moaning all the time, kept shouting at me. He ain't going to enjoy it, is he? So he's not going to develop as a player. He's not going to evolve as a player. He's got to enjoy it. And I think if you've got players that enjoy what they do, you've got half a chance of developing them and making them better.
And what about getting your coaches to coach the West Ham way? What's the
obviously we would have regular in-service training days, and I would be at most of the training sessions and walk around 2 or 3 evenings a week, and I'd be at all the games on a Sunday. I'd never miss a Sunday, so I'd have my 18s on a Saturday. Sunday, I used to enjoy Sundays because I didn't have the responsibility of actually running a team, so I could go round the various age groups and watch how they were doing, see how the players were developing, seeing how the coach was shaping up his team and developing his team, and I might just subtly just throw a couple of little things in, just say, I think you might be best to match them up in midfield. Your 2 against their 3 are getting outplayed, and that's where your problem is. Even though you want to play that way, they're better at that than you, so you might have to match them up today. So I'm trying to make them a little bit tactically aware that way. Or I'd say to them, get your front players just to hit the front men earlier. You're trying to get them to play, but they're playing at the wrong time in the wrong areas. Now, if there's a channel hit the front player, let's just let them join from there. So your midfield player comes short, the ball bypasses the midfield player, goes into and these natural reactions got to be then spin and join. So in the end, I would then, over time, they would sort of get the way we're playing. Obviously, they'd come and watch the youth team play and see how we're trying to do things. And over time, it's not a 2-week job. It takes time to do that.
What about then, for instance, if you're watching one of the sessions midweek and you see something which you don't really think is appropriate for the West Ham way, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I'd step in. Step in. I'd be quite polite about it. I wouldn't be bombastic about it. If it was the coach, John, I'd go, excuse John, can I just come and make a point?
Yeah.
And he'd go, yeah, of course, yeah. He wouldn't say no. So I'd then go in and make the point.
Yeah.
And say, instead of roofing it down there every time you get it, just try and play off one of your midfield players, or try and play it into one of your wide players, or if it was a centre back, just get woofing it down there, indiscriminately. I'd say, can you try and get one of your fullbacks to play? Get them out wide and just try and get one of your fullbacks to play, or one of your support players to play. So I'd subtly just, say my bit, and then hope the coach, and I'd say to him, what do you think of that? And he'd go, yeah, I see your point. I wouldn't be bombastic about him, or certainly wouldn't dig him out in front of the players or anything like that, or in the parents that are watching. I try to do it very subtly and then have a quiet word. I mean, I watched a coach once, and he took 7 minutes to go from one part of a session to another part of a session because he was setting it up, It took 7 minutes. I timed it. So it was a cold evening. He did a little preliminary little pass move part. It was that's good, no problem. Players enjoyed it. I mean, okay, stop there, just going to set this up. Took him 7 minutes to set it up. Said to him afterwards, that took you 7. He said, no, never.
What were the boys doing at the time?
Just fiddling.
Messing around.
Just fiddling. Nothing, doing nothing. So I said, that took you 7 minutes to get out. He said, well, I said, well, no. One, maybe you could have half prepared it before you started, so you were going to move from there to there. And then if you needed to just add a little bit, you could have done that within a minute. And while the boys are perhaps having a quick drink and moving over, or putting different bibs on, or whatever it was that to do, you're then ready. So it took too long. I said, and the boys then are distracted, get disinterested, and you've got to lift them again to go again. And he was a bit indignant about it, to be honest. So
I suppose that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? It's about I think people think automatically about coach development and courses being all about methodology. This is what you're going to coach, how you coach it, rather than a little bit of the organisational tools.
Yeah, of course.
Like you say, especially with the younger players.
Yeah.
About no dead time, much bowling time as possible.
Yeah.
And so how do you get that into your coaches as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Take it for granted.
Next time he coached, I got our IT department to film him. He didn't know, but I got them to film him, and he did. He didn't do the same again, but he did something similar again. So I gave him the DVD. I said, have a look at that and come back next Tuesday and tell me what you think. He went, I thought that was all right. I said, it was better than it was before. I said, but you've got to cut the time down between, your introductory session or your warm-up session into your main theme. So you've got to cut that time down because you've only got an hour, and it's, you're starting to lose, your players. They're starting to get distracted. In the end, the coach, I moved him on because he never quite grasped it.
Yeah.
It was, this is the way I do it, and this is the way I do it, and I had to move him on in the end.
I was going to say it's quite interesting because other academy managers we've talked in the past, they've gone into a club maybe and tried to change the culture, change philosophy. You're quite unique in the terms that you created it and you were there, and people coming into this.
Oh, I inherited it,
but I mean you very much with the academy,
and then I drove it from that point, and I'll make a lot of my basic work was unopposed.
Yeah.
Trying to drill habits into players.
Yeah.
The only criteria was, depending on what it was, it had to be done at match pace, it had to be done quickly.
Yeah.
And where 1 or 2 touch was needed, it had to be done 1 or 2 touch.
Yeah.
So the ball in, the ball back, the through ball, or the ball wide, the shot, the cross, whatever you ended up, the end product.
Yeah.
It's all about the quality. Quality.
So there's that big debate at the moment about the merits of unopposed training into games-related stuff.
Yeah.
You mentioned games to teacher earlier. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you've got to have a mixture of both, of course.
Yeah.
Not all your practice can be unopposed, because ultimately you've got to play a game.
Yeah.
And there's 11 other, eager kids trying to, undo what you're trying to do. So ultimately you have to put what your practice is into real-life game situations. So we'd have a lot of unopposed technical training, and then we'd go into opposed themes. Maybe we might use an overload to try and get some measure of success, especially with the younger ones. Now, if you're looking to say link passes in, you might be better to overload, 5 against 3 as an argument in an area with a targets and might just run the ball over the line and put your foot on the ball as an objective. So all different ways of doing it, or there's small goals and scoring a small goal, etc., etc. Or before you score, you've got to play off a front player, or there's a target play, all sorts of ways. So you've obviously got to add opposition, because the opposition give you the problems that you have to overcome. So all the time you're doing even unopposed practice, you've always got to be mindful that if opposition were in there, what problems would they give? So if a player stood and waited for the ball to arrive, I'd go, stop. Do you think if we had opposition here, that ball would arrive at your feet? And he'd go, no. I'd go, well, why wouldn't it? Because the defender would step in front, wouldn't he? So he said, yeah, he would. So I said, well, how are you going to counter that? So you'd say, well, I'll come and meet the ball. So
I suppose the challenges I found as well is that
you develop those habits.
That really unimportant unopposed work is that, like I say, the way it's done, the tempo it's done, and the quality that you're getting. If it's not, it's half paced and people aren't tuned in. And
no, exactly.
It's
a waste of time then. It's a waste of time.
Then that's the quality of the coach coming through, how to deal with that.
Yeah, and some of the less experienced coaches don't see that, or they don't see it because they haven't been through it.
Yeah,
they haven't been through it. So not all practice should be unopposed, and likewise, not all practice has got to be opposed. So if you're trying to teach 12-year-olds heading, you're not going to put a centre half up along the side of the centre forward and throw a ball in the air or chip a ball up there and say head it, because he's going to get smashed and crashed all over the place.
Yeah.
So you've got to develop the technique first.
Yeah.
You've got to develop the technique of where to head it, body shape, leap, jump, or 1, 2, 3 off 1 foot, etc., etc. So you develop that technique. So then you start to put the passive opposition in, and then you start to put the real thing in, and hopefully through time and effort and practice, he's developed a good enough technique to be able to, win his fair share of the ball's in the air, or whether it's defensively or whether it's in attack. So I think it's a process. Yeah, I think it's a process, because what you're trying to do with that 8-year-old, you're trying to develop that 8-year-old to be a professional at 18. So you've got 10 years, in effect, to get him to where he wants to be or where you want him to be. So it's a 10-year program. So to put straight away, you're putting in opposition straight away. When are you going to get the time to develop the skills and techniques required? So why do we coach? If we're coaching or encouraging, I wouldn't say coach dribbling. I don't think you encourage dribbling. I don't think you coach it. I think you encourage it. So you go on, run with the ball, take him on, because he might be better at taking him on the inside, and you're trying to teach him to take him on the outside. So you say to him, go on, take him on, see if you can beat him. So it might initially just be a pole stuck in the ground. Run at that pole, go left or right, whatever way you want to go, and then make that final pass across the goal, if that's what the practice, and someone comes in and puts it in the goal. So he might be better at going on the inside, he might be better at going on the outside. He might show you something, you go, oh Christ, and you could do that. So same with turns, you teach them a back foot turn, you teach them to roll it off the outside of the foot. Then you'd put them in a situation up against the mannequin maybe, and say, roll the ball and go, I want you to turn with it and roll that mannequin and beat him. And he might show you something, oh, well done, didn't know you had that in you. So I think it's important that, like all development, it's a two-way thing. If you're constantly telling the player, you must do it this way, you must do it that way, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you're taking that initiative away from the player, I think.
I think it's a good point you make there, Tony, because a lot of the people who are these advocates of the just playing games will always talk about, it's not a linear process, it's not a one-way process, and we're saying actually we're not saying it's a one-way process, but we're saying it's two-way. Players will show you something, but then you can't just. I think there's a risk of taking technique for granted, with this, just letting them get on with it in a game.
I would agree.
And this is the people, like you say, who maybe haven't worked in youth development. A lot of people maybe from the sports science community who haven't actually worked with players, young players, and I think that's where there's a bit of a breakdown.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying you've got to do it the way I do it. All I'm just saying is the way I did it and the way I advocated it, and it worked quite well for me. It worked quite well. But unless the player buys into what you're trying to do with him, you'll want to lose her anyway. The player's got to buy into it. And as they get a little bit older, they've got to start to take a little bit of responsibility as well for their own development. So it's they start buying into what you're trying to teach them. They maybe go away and practice it themselves as well. But certainly the ultimate test is a game. The ultimate test, whether it's 5-a-side, whether it's 8-a-side, whether it's 11-a-side, that's the ultimate test. I mean, I'd always said Monday to Friday is our revision, Saturday's our exam. That's how I would say it to the player. So we're practicing in the week, we're practicing for the exam on Saturday. Better crosses, better passing, better defending, more compactness, depending on what we're working on. More goals to shots to goal ratio, more shots on target. This is what we're working towards. Now, the exam is Saturday. See if we've passed or failed the exam Saturday. And then we go back to work Monday and do a bit more revision. So I always put it in those terms for young players.
And how important is the technical detail for that?
I mean, for me, the technique is everything. The technical detail is everything, because one, got to be technically proficient, because they can't perform the given task if they're not. It takes them too long to do it. It takes them, and plus the fact, not only technically, in a physical sense, they've got to be clever between the ears. They've got to understand the game. They've got to see the game. They've got to study the game. I mean, a young Frank Lampard always knew his next pass, even as a youngster. Always knew his next pass. And I took Frank to a Premier League with all the Premier League coaches, all the heads of the academies. We was up in Manchester, and Frank was playing for Man City on his last knock-ins when he was playing. I said, would you come along to the McDonald Hotel and do a little seminar with the coaches and the little questions and answers? So the Premier League asked me to ask him, and I said, yeah, I'd ask him. And he came along. And they had a footage of Frank playing for Chelsea. And it was just on Frank. It wasn't on the game. It was just Frank for about 5 minutes it was. And constantly for 5 minutes he's doing this. Got the ball, bang.
Scanning, so he's
scanning
all
the time. Checking his shoulders all the time.
Yep.
Constantly, absolutely constantly. And when the film finished, Frank said, I didn't realise I did that.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Even I was taken aback. I said, you didn't realise this? No. So I didn't realise I did that. He said, because he said I'd always done it. It was just ingrained.
Yeah.
It was that habit. And
so talk about that then, Tony. Can you remember him doing that sort of thing in academy football?
Yeah, I do. I do remember him. Perhaps not quite as vigorously or as effective.
Yeah.
But it constantly youth team football, academy football, he could play 1 and 2 touch as good as anybody. He always knew his next pass, whether it was short or whether it was long.
What time did you get Frank into the academy?
About 13.
Okay.
About 13. He'd done the rounds because obviously his dad, been an ex-pro, ex-England international, and I knew his dad very well. I played with Frank's dad in the youth team at West Ham, so we've been mates for years. So obviously he eventually chose West Ham, and I think maybe because of his dad, but certainly if another club had been what he wanted, I'm sure he would have gone there. But he chose West Ham, which I was ever so great. We were at the club we were ever so grateful for. And
so that's at 13. He was a top player.
No, he wasn't a top player at 13. No. He was a good player at 13.
Yeah.
He was a good player at 13. But what he was very good at was receiving the ball and passing the ball. That's what he was very good at. And because of who he had behind him, his dad.
Yeah.
And then eventually his uncle became the manager.
Yeah.
Redknapp. And he was excellent for the youth team. Him and Rio Ferdinand were in the same youth team. And they sort of rubbed off each other. They were big mates. They became big friends, even though Frank was a public schoolboy and Rio come from the council estate in Peckham. They become good mates. And those two, if you had said to Rio, for instance, what we need to do is just drop it into the air like that. I'm going to get the ball, get it at your feet and just drop it. He'd go, well, like this. You go, yeah, like that. He could just do it.
Yeah.
They were very proficient in that respect. But where they were different, they weren't content to be in the youth team. They didn't want to be with me. Yeah. Not because they didn't want to be with me. They wanted to be in the reserve team. They wanted to be training with senior players. And when they got playing in the reserve team, they wanted to be in the first team. They wanted to be in the first team pool. They were very hungry, very eager, and added to their game. Rio went on loan to Bournemouth, and Mel Machin was the manager, and he came back and said, technically good, this, that and the other, very good. At our level, this Bournemouth probably his second division then, said heading's not very good. He ducks a little bit when he heads. He's got to improve his heading. And he was 6'4", 6'3" at that time. So perhaps as a young defender, he took for granted that he could head the ball. But you're playing in the second lower tiers of the division, the ball's always in the air, and it's some big ugly centre forwards bashing you about. So he sort of developed that side of it. And Frank, he worked on his physicality, his running, his sprinting. He used to do sprints every day. He used to do running box to box. He used to just do box to box running. He used to come on his day off and just do running relative to his position, running box to box. He'd run from one box to the other box, jog back, sprint to the far end box, jog back. Just get little markers. He used to put spikes on. He bought a pair of sprinting spikes, make him get on his toes. He used to do little 10-yard sprints just to make him feel a little bit quicker. He used to do them to the left, to the right, little turns. And so
he'd do all that by himself.
He'd do that all by himself. They'd do that all by himself. And that's what made him the player he was. And he took that through his career. They tell me at Chelsea he was always standing behind after training, taking free kicks, doing sprinting. Days off he'd come in, always doing extras. Fitness became fitness mad.
So you talk, just to think about that as you think that's a really important asset of players who go that further next level? To people who
100%.
do that a bit extra away from training?
100%. Jermiane Defoe would finish training, he'd go, Tone, can we do some extra shooting? Always want to do shooting. Relative to his game. So I used to put shooting on, making him come in on at angles and shooting to the far post. And I'd say to him, if the keeper shows you near post, don't worry about the far post, stick it in the near post. If the keeper's sort of overcompensated because he's hit a few in there, if he's half going, just stick it in. Just little challenges all the time. And Jermaine reminds me of that whenever I bump into all them extras we used to do. And I said, well, you're a goal scorer and you've continued to score goals, so it must have done. I mean, don't get me wrong, I should do it with a lot of players. I didn't all make the England team or the Premier League, but I should do it with a lot of players. So It wasn't unique, it was with those sorts of players. But what's unique about that group of players that came through over that probably a 10, 15 year period, from Paul Ince, Stuart Slater and all them, I had all those, Paul Allen, Tony Carr, Stevie Potts, Stuart Slater. What they had about them was that they had a desire to become better. And that's, in some players I see today, that's lacking. Talent, but not real desire. They haven't really been shown, is that the right word to use? They don't really know what it takes to get there. They haven't been shown what you need to get there.
And why do you think that is? Do you think it's too much too young and that sort of thing?
I think it becomes too comfortable. I won't speak about West Ham's training ground because it's very basic. I don't know if you've been over, you must have done it.
Of course.
Very basic.
Yeah.
But sometimes that was the uniqueness of it because there was no frills.
Yeah.
You go to Tottenham's training ground, obviously at Cheshunt, or not Cheshunt, wherever it is, Enfield, and you go to Chelsea's training ground at Cobham, state of the art. So these players at 8 years of age, this is normal. Training on billiard table type pitches, this is normal. Being coached by 3 coaches, this is normal. Balls and technical work and pass move with very, very good players. That becomes normal. So they ain't been taught to fight and scrap. They ain't been taught to. Now, I'm not advocating that you teach them to fight and scrap, but the harshest of the reality of becoming a professional footballer is you've got to have an inner steel, you've got to have an inner desire, you've got to have an inner drive. And I think, how do we put that in our young players today? Because if a young player goes out on loan from say a West Ham or a Tottenham or a Chelsea or anyone for that matter, and they go to, should we say, Yeovil Town? I'm just picking Yeovil out of the blue. Most of the feedback that comes back is they're not tough, they don't compete, don't know how to compete. They get bullied off the ball and they're physically not well. They're not developed. So, how do we prepare our players? Because they're not all going to be Premier League players. A lot of them, probably 95% of them, are going to have to find a living outside the Premier League, and in probably another 50% of them are going to have to earn a living probably outside the league. And that's a tough environment down there. It's about what you are, how you compete, how you perform, and how you deal with the challenges that come in that respect. And do we challenge the players enough?
So how did you deal with that at West Ham? What was your approach to trying to create them challenges, that environment?
Well, initially you're all hoping that they become players for you. And I'd always say to them, occasionally the manager will ask for players to come up and train with them because he's free. I'm free short today. I need 3 players. Send me 2 midfield players and a forward. And that was those players' way of showcasing themselves in front of the manager. Or it might be that I'll say to the manager, I've got a young player here, Gaffer, I think you need to have a look at him. He'd go, send him with me tomorrow and I'll have a look. And I'd say to them, if you get the chance to go up and train with the first team, don't feel it's just a training session. you've got to then, that's your opportunity to show them what you're about. And many a time the manager has came to me and go, who was that player sent up? I go, that was Davy Jones. And he'd say, well, you weren't bad him. I'll have him tomorrow. Send him with me tomorrow. And that was their chance to sort of show what they're about. I said to him, you got to get noticed. When you go up there, you got to get noticed. There was one highlight. We both groups used to train at Chadwell Heath before we split sites. And the manager come up, Frank Lampard come over, Harry Redknapp was the manager, said, we need a midfield player. So-and-so's gone in injured. So I sent over Michael Carrick. And as we were walking off the pitch at the end, both groups had finished, we had an Israeli midfield player playing at West Ham called Ayal Berkovic, if you remember him.
Yep.
And he said to me, Tony, he said, who is this player? I can't do his accent, but who is this player? So I said, Michael. I thought he was going to go, he ain't no good. He goes, I said, Michael Carrick. He said, he's a very good player. He said, he would take my place in the team.
Wow.
I said, yeah. He said, yeah. Not yet, he said, but he would take my place in the team. So not only will the manager notice, other players will notice.
Yeah.
Mark Noble is always full of chat, Mark, anyway, you know. I sent a player over to him once, to the first team, and he come back, who's that player you sent over? Oh, cheeky, you know, as Mark is. I said, that was so-and-so. He go, flash little sod him, ain't he? Jack the Land, ain't he? So you've got no chance him. So straight away, the player suss you out.
Yeah.
So it's important that you try and keep them grounded. Keep the reality that even if I give you a 2-year contract, at the end of that 2-year contract, you've got to earn another one.
Yeah.
If you're in the first team, you've got to play well enough to stay in the first team. Because if you don't, you're out. You're off. You know, transferred in the reserves or whatever. So the challenge is always to be on your best, do your best, and the challenge is always going to be there. You've never arrived. The challenge is always going to be there.
Do you think there's a certain aspect maybe that some players just have that intrinsic desire to do more, and
yes.
Maybe they've got more of a chance, where some players just don't have that? And
no question.
Do you think you can implant that in players that are younger? Can you try and change that?
I'm not sure you can change a character.
Yeah.
I think you can improve someone's attitude. I mean, I don't mind saying it. Junior Stanislas, who's now playing for Bournemouth in the Premier League, doing very well. I mean, we had Junior. I had Junior as a youth player, young player. Lazy, not a great desire, great talent, very talented, not a great desire, bit flippant. Played in West Ham's first team, played in the Premier League for West Ham, but got released because he didn't have that inner desire to keep doing what you have to do to stay in the team. And he's had to go round the circle, come back again. He's now, I think he went to Burnley when they were in the lower divisions. Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall at Bournemouth were at Burnley for a while, saw Junior, and they brought him back down to Bournemouth. He's come on the journey with Bournemouth. He's now playing in the Premier League, and I saw him a couple of years ago, and he had, as soon as he saw me, he started laughing. I said, I know what you're going to say. So I said, well done, you've done well. He said, if only I'd have listened to you when I was 18, 19. He said, I've realised now. He said, I've got married, or I've got a partner, I've got kids. He said, I realise now, once you get responsibilities, you've got to knuckle down if you want to earn a good living. So the penny dropped eventually with Junior. So it can happen. It can happen, but sometimes they might have to go on a journey to get there.
Talking about that journey, what's your thoughts on, there's more and more players now, like Jane Vardy's, for instance, they've been released from academies early, and they've dropped down and worked their way up. Do you think there's a certain, like you talk about the challenge and the having to fight your way back up, do you think that's maybe a plus point now for some players?
Well, I think in Jamie Vardy's case, you've only got to look at the way he plays. Full of energy, full of running, very aggressive, don't stop running. And it's a great asset for a forward. Ball goes over the top, he chases lost causes and puts the ball in the net. So maybe when he was younger, he perhaps wasn't as strong, wasn't as effective, maybe wasn't as big. He's not massive now, but it wasn't particularly big. Maybe a smaller frame, and someone made the choice that he's not quite got it, and he's gone on that journey. But what he's maintained, I don't know him from Adam, but what he's maintained is that desire, and he showed it at Fleetwood. Has got recognised, and of course he's now in the England setup. So it can happen. It can happen, but unfortunately, too many players drop out of academies and give up on the game because maybe it's affected them psychologically. I'm not good enough. I don't want to do it anymore. They fall out of love with the game. So that's why it's a very delicate issue when you're releasing under 12s. So from under 12s, I think that's a real problem area. How do we keep players in the system at that young age? Because for all those that get released, there's got to be players that could be good enough to come again, that will develop a bit later, will show, what they're worth maybe at 14 because they're not quite got it at 10, and they need that time. Clubs haven't got the time, haven't got the patience, if you like. So I haven't got all the answers, but it's certainly an issue.
And just talk about one of your other past players. Interests me, Joe Cole, who came from the academy from my area. I grew up in Camden. I remember him as a young player.
Yeah.
An amazingly talented, skillful player. One of the most skillful players to ever come out of the academy. A couple of questions. Number one, it's a boy from Camden, North London, a Chelsea fan. The family. How did you manage to recruit him? Instead of win that environment. And then two, how do you deal with a player like that, a dribbler, and like such an amazing talent, and and you're in a maybe a West Ham way philosophy, which is very much pass and move.
He was a little bit easier because of his talent, but certainly he did the rounds of every club in the country. Went around collecting tracksuits and shirts from all the other clubs. I believe he went on to coach to Wembley with Chelsea when Glenn Odden was the manager. They said, "Come on the coach," when they win one of the finals. But his dad, George, always said to us, he'll sign for West Ham. And I go, well, look, it'd be a lot healthier if you sign this form, George. We put it in the drawer, and when we register it when you come back, because he was going to do the rounds of all the clubs. He said, "There's my contract," and he shook our hand. Me and Jimmy Hampson, chief scout, he shook our hand, and he said, "There's my contract." So, but what Joe liked about West Ham, I mean, Joe will probably speak himself, or probably has spoken himself about it, was he liked the environment. He liked the freedom he was given to play. And when he was in the youth team, we started to play 3 at the back, 5 in midfield, and a number 10. I didn't call it number 10 then. I called it a free roll. You got a free roll.
Yeah.
And Joe was that free roll. Nowadays, it's my wife. Just a minute. Nowadays, it's call it a number 10.
I'll pause it.
Hello. I mean, Joe was. We had a promise that he would stay. He would come to West Ham. But what I think he liked was the environment. He liked the people. He liked the welcome. His family liked the welcome. They liked the environment. Very down to earth. No airs and graces. We gave him that freedom. I played 3 at the back, 5 in midfield, a striker and a number 10. As I said, we didn't call it number 10 then. I called it a free roll. I gave Joe that free roll, and I was, obviously encouraged him just to get in little pockets behind the midfield and getting the ball. And when he got in those areas, he'd do lots of damage. So he was given that freedom to do that, to develop his.
What about earlier on in his academy career when he was a younger player?
He would go through all the same drills and practices, in terms of pass, move, but with Joe, you always had to give him licence. And I think what I never did, and all the coaches that worked with Joe, what we never did was that we never said, "Don't do this, you can't do that." We never said that, and I think that's what he liked. We would, if he went on a dribble and he lost it, we wouldn't criticise because of the talent that he had. We'd say, "No, don't worry about it. Don't worry, it's not a problem. Not a problem. Do it again." And but what he did, Joe, people don't realise with Joe is when he was a young player, when he lost the ball, he'd go after it. he had a desire. He'd put his foot in and he'd have a tackle. And he would, he had a real enthusiasm. He didn't just run with it, dribble, lose it, and walk back like Ronaldo does, or what he did was when he was younger. Yeah. He had a real desire to get after the ball and win it back, and often would, and then win it back, drag it through the legs of somebody, get on it, and then go on another dribble and hurt the opposition, and invariably set up a goal or score a goal. So it was a talent. It was a sort of precocious sort of talent that you had to manage in a very delicate way. You couldn't say to him, "You've got to play 1 and 2 touch, Joe," because I didn't want to take away what he was good at. We would say to him, "Play 1 and 2 touch when it's appropriate. If it's right, just play them, just set it and run, and we'll play you we'll set you away in space. You haven't always got to get it and dribble. Maybe someone just set it and run." So he sort of developed his game like that. When he went to Chelsea from West Ham, and Mourinho took over at Chelsea, Mourinho said to him that, Joe told me this, Mourinho said to him, "You'll either play the way I want you to play, or you sit in the stands." So Joe said to me, he said, "I sat in the stands for a couple of weeks." He said, and I thought, well, I better play the way he wants me to play. So what Mourinho, he was more of a functional coach, wants players to have a role with and without the ball. He was playing on the left-hand side for Chelsea, and his responsibility was to track the right back. And if he didn't track the right back, Mourinho would go absolutely potty. And so whenever he lost the ball, he had to run and get back and show that side of his game and add that part to his game. So Mourinho, I suppose, developed into a more of a, in inverted commas, a team player. But certainly, I thought he had his best spell even when he played for England. That might have even been in Japan and somewhere around there when he played as a number 10 for England. He had a great World Cup, had a great year for Chelsea. He had a great year for England in that free role.
Do you think if it's a bit of a stretch, but do you think if he would have gone to Spain or something and played like that, would it have been a bigger
maybe
some kind of culture where 10s are more
maybe
acceptable at the time?
Maybe. But let's be fair, he's had a good career. He's won titles at Chelsea, Champions League final, England caps, FA Cups, League Cups. He's won nearly all there is to win, and he's now in America playing for Tampa Bay, and that's Joe, because he wants to play.
Yeah,
he's gone out to Tampa Bay because he wants to play, and obviously he's enjoying that environment with his family. But he's doing his coaching badges, and he wants to take up coaching when he comes back.
Yeah. So
we might see Joe as a coach in the next 3 or 4 years.
Just a couple more things, Tony. I know I don't want to keep you too long, mate. Just what's your attitude to winning on the games on the weekend in the academy? In terms of the young players, the younger thing. Well, how do you deal with that winning and development?
Yeah.
Question.
I think you set out to play every game to win. Goes without saying, because if we're not trying to score more goals than the opposition, what's the point of playing? That's the whole point of playing. If we're not trying to score more goals than the opposition, why are we playing? So every game we set out is to win. But what we don't do is set our team out to win at all costs, because you've still got to have a desire in a young player to want to win a football match. So if he's losing, don't talk about losing. How can we get back in the game? If he's winning, don't gloat about winning. Just try and play the best we can play. So winning is important. Under 18, I think it is very important. It's not the be all and end all. Don't get me wrong, but I think you've got to try to develop a winning mentality in young players. Winning is part of the game, and so is losing part of the game. And obviously try and treat them as equal. You don't like losing, but you enjoy winning. So, but no team ever gets set up to play, well, I've got to win this game, we've got to win today, we're playing Chelsea, we've got to win today. It's not that, but every game you play, you start a game, let's try and win it. Let's try and win the game. Let's try and be defensively solid, let's try and be creative up front and score more goals than the opposition. And I think that's the way you should approach every game. And I don't think winning is a dirty word, I really don't. But not win at all costs. Don't get me wrong. Not win at all costs.
There's the balance like anything, right?
Yeah, but winning is important. I mean, if you've got a team that loses every single Saturday, I don't think that can be much fun. So there's got to be a balance. You've got to win some. So when you do win, enjoy it. But when you do lose, don't get too despondent. So yeah, winning is important, but it's not the be all and end all.
Also, quickly, what about your experiences of going into Europe with young academy teams? Did you, as the time went on, did you notice a difference between European players and English players? There's often in the past talked about differences.
I think the younger players, when you took young players, there wasn't a lot of difference. And of course, because our registration year is September till August, and their registration years are January till December, there's always sometimes a bit of a mismatch in the age bands. So there was sometimes always a disadvantage in that respect. And I think there's some argument that we should go to year groups just to keep in line with Europe. But from a very young age, I don't think there was a lot of difference between the good continental teams and the good British teams. I'm sure your time at Chelsea that you'd go to European competitions and probably be better than most European teams you played. Where it doesn't get transferred is at the very top senior level. It doesn't seem to transfer that well, and I don't know the answer to that.
And
maybe it's the Premier League and the harshness.
Question. Yeah. What about this apparent wall facing a lot of our young players who are not getting the opportunities at first teams?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on this, and any way we can maybe
it's
change
because
it?
It's because of the money in the Premier League, isn't it? It's because of the TV rights, Sky TV, etc., that clubs now, they're going to get £100 million per year in the Premier League from TV rights. So they're going to spend their money on the best players they can. So that lessens the opportunity for the best young English players. So that if look at Manchester United, they've just signed Sanchez today, who's one of the top players in the world. So any Man United youngster, I'm only using them as an example, but it's the same across the country, that's got ambitions to get into that Man United team, has got to be better than Sanchez. And that's a tough ask for an 18, 19,
I suppose you look at Lingard and Rashford who've been playing, suddenly they're not going to be playing?
Yeah, they're going to be part of it, but they're going to be part of the squad, but their chances are going to be limited. There's even England players now that are not playing on a regular basis for Premier League teams. So that's going to be detrimental to the England team in the long term. So it's about the money. If Sky TV pulled the plug tomorrow, you'd see a big influx of English players playing in the Premier League again. And that's where sometimes players that went in. Remember Gary Neville doing a thing for the Premier League when he started playing for Man United. He didn't believe he was good enough or ready to play. But Ferguson threw him in these. They took him away on these European trips, European ties, and all of a sudden he said, "You're playing today." And he went, "I'm playing." He said, "I didn't think I was ready. Didn't think I was nowhere near it." But they were thrown in. Nowadays, you don't get that opportunity. That opportunity is gone. That's only 10, 15 years ago. So it has changed dramatically. It's tougher. There's a glass ceiling there that's very, very hard to break. And
then one more question, just a couple more things to set up, and then we're going to. Just interesting to know, the Academy of Football West Ham had a very certain way of playing. Down the years, the philosophy of the first team changed. Maybe, like you talked about, with the pressures of the Premier League. Did that have an impact on what you did in the academy? Did the managers ever say, "Look, we want to change the way we're doing things"?
No, I was always basically left to my own devices. I remember saying to Sam Allardyce, because Sam came in to do a job at West Ham, get us promoted, and played a very functional style, and was very good at it, I have to say. And I said to him, "Do you want us to play in any different way, Sam? He'd go, no. He said, "What I want you to do," he said, "if you ever send me a player, he's got to be able to do the things I want him to do." If it was a defender, he liked his defenders to hit the front players or hit the channel. There was no grey areas, because it was about squeezing up, playing the game in the opposition's half, and being tight defensively. And that's the way he wanted to play. And he got us promotion and he was there 3 years and was very, very successful in what he did. But he didn't sort of say we've got to play in any particular way or not. And I think you just try and develop your players in a rounded way that they can adapt to whatever a manager may want them to do.
And then speaking about players, what would be your advice to a young aspiring player or parent of a player at the beginning of their journey?
Well, I'd say keep grounded, and take it year on, year on. Don't start dreaming about playing in the Premier League when you're 12 or 10. Take it year on and just work as hard as you can at what you're doing. Practice. Be the best you can be. And, you know, seek advice, talk to people, but work at it. You don't owe the club nothing. You don't owe them nothing. You've got to prove to the club that you're good enough. So stay humble, stay grounded, and keep working at it. And
finally, what about a coach, young coach, and his beginning of their journey? You'd like to get to a position like yourself, who's been. Well,
I think you've just got to get ours out on the pitch. Too many coaches now, with respect, spend too much time on a computer and don't do enough out on the grass. I think they've got to get out on the grass, learn from your mistakes, talk to people, watch coaches, and you know, a lot of the computer work now is because you've got to do your session plans, you've got to do your reports, etc., etc. So I understand this part and part, which we didn't really have. We had a book we had to fill in, but it wasn't as taxing as what they have to do now. But I would, you know, you've got to spend your hours out on the grass and try and work with good people you can learn from and listen to and watch. And that's, you know, that's how, you know, and ask questions. Ask questions. When I was younger, I was thirsty for knowledge. So I'd ask coaches, I'd ask the manager, why did you do that? What was your thoughts behind that? I wasn't afraid to ask. You know, in a polite way, not in a rude way, but get out on the grass. That's where you learn.
And finally, I promise this is the last one. EPPP was a good thing or a bad thing for English football?
I'm not sure it's brought the rewards they were hoping at this stage. The good thing for me was that you increase the hours of coaching for the younger players. I think that's a positive. I'm not sure it's being used as wisely as it should at this point. I think it'll have to be refined at some point. But I don't think it's bringing the rewards that they thought it might at this point. And I know for a fact that some chairmen are questioning the wisdom of the extra expenditure they've had to spend on the academy to achieve the Category 1 status, and the lack of reward that's coming back their way.
Can you give us a quick example of what is the sort of financial, cost of an Cat 1 academy in terms of what it used to be?
Well, you're talking, I suppose, at the low end they're spending 3 to 4 million a year at the low end.
Yeah.
At the top end they're probably spending 7-8 million a year on their academy.
And what did you used to spend on academy?
About 3 million.
3 million.
When I was there, about 3 million. Remembering
pre-EPP.
Yeah, we were out of the 20 league clubs, we were about 13th.
Okay.
In expenditure, so round about there. So mid to low end.
Tony Carr, thank you very much.
Thanks, Saul.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.